The 6th night of April 1994 will always go down in history as the moment when darkness descended upon the small East African state of Rwanda. 100 days after that night, close to 1 million Rwandans lost their lives in a brutal genocide. Questions still linger about who shot down President Juvenal Habyarimana's Falcon 50 jet moments before it touched down. His death would change the continent forever, leading to a genocide, causing the first great African war that involved 9 African countries and around 25 armed groups that left 2.5 million people dead and millions displaced. So who killed Habyarimana? Here is the story. 2 East African neighboring countries had political and security challenges. These 2 states, Rwanda and Burundi, had something else in common. They were and are both predominantly inhabited by the Hutu and the Tutsi people. Across the border, there was a geographically huge Tanzania, a big brother of sorts. Now, Tanzania's then president, Ali Hassan Mwinyi, invited the 2 presidents of Rwanda and Burundi for discussions on how to resolve their political and security debacles. Habyarimana and Burundi's Ntaryamira set off and headed to Dar es Salaam. After the summit, the guests had to return home. But Habyarimana, cautious about flying back in the dark, asked to stay for the night. However, his Tanzanian host declined. His reason? No arrangements had been made to cater for the guests overnight. Following this response, Habyarimana had no choice but leave, taking with him the Burundi president, Cyprien Ntaryamira, Rwandan Army Chief of Staff, Deogracias Nsabimana, French pilots, French flight engineer, and a few other dignitaries. That night, as the exhausted Habyarimana caught sight of his presidential villa through the window of his descending plane, suddenly a bevy of air rockets bombarded the aircraft, bursting it into flames and reducing it, everything and everyone on board, into ruins. He almost made it home. The genocide starts only hours later. Who killed Habyarimana? Within hours of the explosion, a host of rival theories began to emerge. First, it was initially claimed that white men had been spotted running from the possible missile launch site, which had led to a suggestion that the plane could have been shot down by French or Belgian soldiers. These rumors were, however, never substantiated, and they vanished as quickly as they had come. So this led to the second theory that the plane had been shot down by the radical members of the Akazu, led by Agathe Habyarimana, the slain president's wife. As Andrew Wallis writes, Agathe Habyarimana was no ordinary president's wife and mother. Those who had the pleasure of meeting the terrifyingly ambitious wife of the former Rwandan dictator were left under the little pretense that she was intent on keeping her family in power, whatever the consequences. From the late 1980s, Agatha began to form around her a group of Hutu radicals and extremists, Le Clan de Madame, also known as the Small House or Akazu, they called themselves. This close-knit group was hell-bent on one objective: violent retention of power and influence. According to this group, the president had made overly generous concessions, among which included his agreement under the 1993 Arusha Peace Accord to share power with the Rwanda Patriotic Front, RPF, a rebel outfit under the leadership of the now Rwandan president, Paul Kagame. Enraged by his actions, it is alleged that these extremists had fired the opening salvo in an internal coup, offering Habyarimana as a sacrificial lamb to crush both the RPF and the Hutu moderates. Support for this theory came from many hints dropped in extremist newsletters and radio broadcasts, predicting something very big in the first days of April. The speed with which the first Interahamwe militia roadblocks went up after the plane crash reinforced this theory. This is the official position of the current Rwandan government regarding Habyarimana's assassination. However, as the old adage says, the victors of war always write history. Can we really trust this theory? Well, wait until you hear the third. The third theory, and one that we find rather peculiar, is that the Falcon Jet 50 was shot down by the RPF using air-to-surface missiles. It is suggested that the plane had been downed by the RPF, who were greedy for more power than they had got through the 1993 Arusha Accord. The RPF were aware that the envisaged elections would favor Hutu parties and reduce the RPF movement to a camel role in Rwandan politics. The RPF vehemently denies this theory for pretty obvious reasons. Because to suggest that the RPF brought down the plane became synonymous with arguing that it was responsible for the genocide. It would depict the RPF as a power-hungry labor movement that inadvertently triggered the slaughter of its ethnic support base by killing a head of state. It would also mean that the RPF intended to kill between 500 and 1 million Tutsis because, as one theory goes, the more massive the bloodletting, the better the rebels could position themselves as rescuers. Entertaining the possibility that, whether through rashness or ruthlessness, the leader, routinely labeled in the West as the man who ended the genocide, might have started it would not do. Any admission of RPF guilt would undermine the new Rwandan government's image as a blameless victim. And even setting the issue of intentionality aside, killing a president returning from peace talks, a leader who on paper had agreed to share power, even if few believed Habyarimana could ever follow through, would make the rebels guilty not only of bad faith, but a war crime. Some historians like Gerard Prunier initially argued that it was not in the political interest of the RPF to kill President Habyarimana. He argued that the RPF had obtained a good political settlement from the Arusha Agreement and could not hope for anything better. As the years passed by, the question of RPF responsibility showed a stubborn refusal to go away, and some analysts, journalists, and aid workers who had accepted the new government account with a murmur began to doubt. Witnesses claiming first-hand testimony kept coming forward, and all had one characteristic in common. They were ex-RPF. You see, the truth has a way of sneaking up on you like a thief in the night. Despite President Kagame's tight-knit group of influencing the tale of the 1994 genocide, over the years there have been leaks that disclose the shocking revelations about the mysterious targeting and assassination of Habyarimana from insiders within the RPF. One of the whistleblowers was Alois Luyenzi, a former Kagame bodyguard who claimed to have been present at the meeting in Mulindi between Kagame and his closest commanders, at which the decision was made to shoot down the plane. The other was Adbul Rusubiza, a former lieutenant who said he had been given the task of surveying possible sites to be used for the missile launch. On the 8th of November 1994, the United Nations established the International Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, in Arusha to identify the perpetrators of the genocide. When it was first established with respected South African judge Richard Goldstone as its chief prosecutor, the ICTR certainly saw probing the plane's downing as well within its scope. When the ICTR investigators Jim Lyons and Michael Hourigan were approached in 1997 by 3 former RPF fighters claiming direct knowledge of Kagame's responsibility, they excitedly called Goldstone's successor, Canadian Louis Abba, to say they had compiled a dossier outlining grounds for prosecution. But Abba's approach swiveled unexpectedly from initial enthusiasm to frosty hostility. During a tense meeting, she ordered the investigation team terminated, dismissed the credibility of the men's sources, and queried their mandate to investigate the plane crash. Shocked, investigators speculated that Kigali's various Western friends, most likely the United States government, had applied pressure. What prompted her about turn remains unclear. Louis Abba just did a 180 degrees turnaround. Someone above was telling her this was not a good idea to be investigating Paul Kagame. Lyons later told the BBC. Abba's feisty successor, Swiss prosecutor Clara Del Ponte, insisted that her jurisdiction did indeed extend to the plane and secretly set up a special investigations unit to probe that and other RPF crimes. Word must have gotten out. No surprise given that Rwanda's intelligence services had placed informants among the ICTR's Rwandan translators and were also, thanks to the equipment helpfully provided by the United States, monitoring the court's telephone, fax, and internet traffic. When Del Ponte's joint contract at both the ICTR and the International Crime Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia expired, she was forced by the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan to focus on the latter, and a Gambian took over her Rwandan duties. It is clear that it all started when we embarked on these special investigations, Del Ponte later said. pressure from Rwanda contributed to the non-renewal of my mandate. Human rights investigator Alson Desfogas, often called as a prosecution witness by the ICTR during the trials of the genocide's suspected masterminds, had left the question of who brought down the plane open in Leave No One to Tell the Story, Genocide in Rwanda, a magisterial investigation. But her views, like those of many experts, including Prunier, changed over time. Interviewed by Lara Santoro in Arusha in 2001, she told the journalist off the record that she had always suspected the RPF might be responsible for the plane's downing, but had recently become convinced of it. She died without making her suspicion public. Yet, even as one tribunal was successfully shuffled, other prosecutors emerged to challenge Kigali's official version of events. In November 2006, French anti-terrorist judge Jean-Louis Bruguière, who had been asked by the families of the dead French pilots and flight engineer aboard to investigate, caused a diplomatic shockwave by announcing that he was issuing international arrest warrants for 9 of Kagame's closest aides, including Geno Kayumba, Kabarebe, Kayonga, and Nziza. For the RPF, the physical elimination of President Juvenal Habyarimana was the necessary precondition for seizing power by force, and was inscribed in a vast plan worked out to this end, said Bruguière. The final order to attack the presidential plane was given by Paul Kagame himself during a meeting in Burundi on the 31st of March 1994. As the head of state, Kagame enjoyed immunity under French law, but the warrants, if acted upon, could have marked the effective decapitation of the RPF. Outraged, Kigali immediately cut diplomatic ties with France. Denouncing Bruguière as an impostor, Kagame rallied against the notion that the country that had propped up Habyarimana's despotic regime should dare pronounce judgment on its own. They should first try themselves because they killed our people, he said. Rwanda would counter with its inquiry. Dubbed the Musinzi Report after the chairman Jean Musinzi, its January 2010 findings, to no one's surprise, laid the blame squarely on the Akazu. To no one's surprise again, because while it interviewed 500 witnesses and commissioned a ballistic report from a British Defense Academy, every member of its committee of independent experts was an RPF member appointed by Kagame. However, it is important to note that the surface-to-air missiles that downed the Falcon jet were Soviet-made. They had been sold to Uganda by Russia, and only one side in the conflict had ready access to the Ugandan weaponry, RPF, who had fought along with Uganda's National Resistance Movement, a rebel group led by Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. On the 1st of October 2011, the former RPF General Secretary, Theogene Rudasingwa, confessed in a post on his Facebook page that Kagame had told him in July 1994 that he was responsible for shooting down the plane, deliberately derailing the Arusha peace process because he was bent on absolute power. While insisting that he had never personally been party to the plot, Theogene begged for forgiveness from families of those who had died on the plane and the entire Rwandan nation, acknowledging his role as one of the regime's propagandists in chief. Like many others in the RPF leadership, he said, "I enthusiastically sold this deceptive storyline, especially to foreigners who by and large came to believe it, even when I knew that Kagame was the culprit of the crime." The following year, in October 2013, Theogene flew to Madrid to tell Judge Meleles what he knew about the plane and the deaths of 9 Spanish citizens in Rwanda, among other things. By then, Geno Kayumba Nyamwasa too had gone public. The trial in Johannesburg of the 6 men accused of his attempted murder was held in June 2012. He used the opportunity to publicly accuse Kagame of responsibility for the plane's downing, as well as Laurent Kabila's murder. Granting series of press interviews, he denied any personal involvement in the plane's destruction, but said he stood ready to formally present his evidence to the French investigators. "I was in the position to know," he said. The following year, it was Major Jean-Marie Mikombelo's turn to testify. Now living in Brussels and a prominent RNC member, Rwanda National Congress, an opposition group of Rwandan exiles, Mikombelo had worked in the intelligence and risen to number 2 in Rwanda's Ministry of Defense. He told Judge Trividich how, as one of the 600 elite troops guarding Rwanda's parliament building in 1994, he had attended meetings where logistics of the presidential attack were discussed. "When the boss is killed, everything will go ahead more smoothly, his senior officers remarked. No one in the military believed in Arusha, Mikombero told Michaela Wong. A road ambush on Habyarimana's presidential convoy had been envisaged, but RPF commanders could not work out how to safely extract the team afterwards. So, focus shifted to the air. The missiles were smuggled into Kigali, hidden in a pickup truck stacked with wood. The morning attempt had to be postponed because of fog. A bout of malaria put Mikombero out of action, but he could effortlessly identify members of the five-man team who had driven off that evening to carry out the operation, changing the history of the Great Lakes forever. On the balance of probabilities, one has to sit back and ask the tough question: who killed Habyarimana? The evidence suggests that whoever planned and executed the assassination of Habyarimana is largely responsible for the Rwandan genocide in 1994 that saw the killing of close to 1 million people in the small, low-populated East African country of Rwanda. Cognizant of this and aware of the overwhelming sea of evidence out there implicating him and his Rwandan Patriotic Front, President Paul Kagame and his government have invested heavily in rewriting history and dominated the tale of the genocide story. The RPF government insists that the 1994 genocide be called the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis, and yet there are some Hutus as well as Twas that were killed, and set up several museums across the country. One of such key museums is the Kigali Genocide Memorial Museum, at the heart of Kigali, Rwanda's and probably Africa's cleanest city. When tourists from across the world visit the memorial site, they are walked through a gruesome tale of how the hateful Hutus set up a deliberate plan to exterminate the Tutsi minority in Rwanda. Make no mistake, Kagame is a smart dictator who has kept his people under his grip. Just as extremely fascist states like North Korea, the citizens are fed on state propaganda, and anyone who dares question it faces either death or arrest. There is a long list of individuals who have been allegedly assassinated by the Rwandan RPF government, to the extent that diplomatic relations between Rwanda and South Africa were suspended when a Rwandan opposition politician, Patrick Karegeya, was assassinated in Johannesburg. In a nutshell, overwhelming evidence points to the RPF and Paul Kagame being implicit in the assassination of Habyarimana by taking down his plane. For now, Paul and the RPF government have succeeded in frustrating any formal inquiry into the matter through diplomatic and not so diplomatic means like assassination of whistleblowers. The only hope for the victims is that more facts will emerge after the RPF has bequeathed power. Only and only then, hopefully, shall an independent and fair investigation into the matter be carried out.